There's a question men over 60 ask me all the time, but almost always in private. They lean in, lower their voice, and ask, Dr. Romano, how many times a week should I actually be having sex at my age? Is it normal that I can't perform like I did when I was younger? And honestly, the fact that this question gets whispered instead of discussed openly is part of the problem. I'm Dr. Lila Romano, a board-certified urologist with over a decade of clinical experience helping men reclaim their vitality, their confidence, and their sexual health. And today, I'm going to answer that question completely and honestly. We're talking about how often is healthy, what's realistic, and here's the part that surprises most men, why the number itself matters far less than one specific thing almost nobody talks about. Stay with me until the halfway point especially, because what I'm about to share there will completely change the way you measure sexual satisfaction. But before we get to that answer, let's talk about why sex changes after 60. Because understanding the why is what helps you adapt, instead of spending your energy fighting against your own body. Here's something I see in my practice constantly. A man has one difficult experience in the bedroom. Maybe things didn't go the way he expected, and instead of talking about it, he goes quiet. He starts avoiding intimacy. He tells himself, I'm just getting older. And over the next several months, what started as one uncomfortable night slowly becomes a pattern of distance from his partner, from himself, and from a part of life that used to bring him real joy. I want to stop that cycle right here, because in most cases, what's happening is completely explainable, completely normal, and more importantly, something you can absolutely work with. So let's go through the 4 key reasons things change. The first is testosterone. This hormone is the engine behind your libido, your erection quality, and your overall energy. Testosterone begins declining at roughly 1% per year after the age of 40. By the time you reach 60, that decline has become noticeable for most men. And here's what I want you to hear clearly. This does not erase desire. It softens it. It slows it down. You are not broken. You are aging. And there is a very big difference between those two things. The second change is circulation. In your younger years, blood flow to your erectile tissue was fast and strong. But as you age, and especially if you're dealing with high blood pressure, diabetes, or elevated cholesterol, blood moves more slowly. And here's the part most doctors don't take the time to explain. The inner lining of your blood vessels, called the endothelium, loses flexibility over time. It becomes less efficient at producing a critical molecule called nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is essentially the master switch that tells your blood vessels to open wide and let blood rush in. Less nitric oxide means weaker, slower erections. That is not failure. That is physiology. Think of your arteries like a garden hose. When it's young and flexible, water rushes through freely. As it stiffens and narrows over the years, pressure builds and flow drops. Same principle, different consequences. The third factor is medication. Many men over 60 are managing conditions that require daily medication, blood pressure drugs, diabetes medications, cholesterol treatment. And many of these come with sexual side effects. Beta blockers, for example, can reduce libido. Certain diuretics can affect erection quality. This doesn't mean you should stop your medication, please. Never do that. What it means is that you should have an honest conversation with your doctor, because sometimes a simple adjustment in type or dose can make a meaningful difference. And the fourth factor is psychological. Gentlemen, stress is one of the most powerful suppressors of sexual function that exists. When you're anxious, especially anxious about performing, your body releases cortisol, your stress hormone. And cortisol and testosterone are like rivals. When one goes up, the other gets crowded out. One embarrassing moment, one night of performance anxiety, one silent week of avoidance, and that cortisol stays elevated, which makes the next experience harder, which raises more anxiety, which raises more cortisol. It becomes a cycle that feeds itself. So, gentlemen, these changes are normal. They are not a disease. They're a new phase of your sexual life, one that simply requires a little more awareness and a little more intention than before. So, let's answer the question. How often is normal for men over 60? Here's the truth, and I want you to really hear this. There is no universal number. It genuinely varies from person to person, from relationship to relationship, from health status to health status. But research does give us a useful reference point. Data from the AARP Sexual Health Survey and studies published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine indicate that the average frequency for sexually active men between the ages of 60 and 70 is roughly once to twice per week. For men over 70, once a week to once every 2 weeks is completely normal and healthy. These are averages, not targets, not minimums, not grades on a report card. Averages. I think about 2 patients I've treated who illustrate this perfectly. The first was a 65-year-old man, generally healthy, active, managing his weight well. He and his wife were intimate about twice a week. He felt energetic, connected, and confident. By every measure, physical and emotional, he was thriving. The second patient was the same age. He was managing both type 2 diabetes and high blood pressure. For him, once every 2 weeks felt right. That was the rhythm that matched his energy, his health, and his relationship. And by every measure that actually matters, he was equally healthy and equally satisfied. Same age, very different frequencies. Both are completely normal. The difference between those 2 men wasn't a number. It was that both of them had stopped measuring themselves against who they used to be. And that shift, that single mental shift, changed everything. Now, here's where it gets interesting. Because most men asking this question are asking the wrong question entirely. They're focused on frequency. But the research tells a different story. A landmark 25-year longitudinal study from Duke University found that sexual frequency was indeed one of the top predictors of longevity in older men, but only when that sexual activity was satisfying. Men who rated their sex lives as satisfying lived measurably longer. Men who were active but anxious, stressed, or performing out of obligation. The health benefits were far smaller. What that means in plain language is this: the goal is satisfaction, not performance. The goal is connection, not a number. There is no scoreboard here, gentlemen. And any doctor who makes you feel otherwise isn't giving you the full picture. And while we're dismantling unrealistic expectations, let's talk about duration, because this is where I see so many men silently beating themselves up. I have men sit across from me and say, "Dr. Romano, I can't last more than a few minutes. Does that mean something is wrong with me?" Here's my answer. Research published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine shows that the average duration of intercourse for men in this age group is 3 to 7 minutes. 3, 2, 7. If you've been measuring yourself against what you remember from your 20s, or what you've seen in movies, or what you imagine everyone else is doing, stop. The science says you are completely normal. But here's what I want you to understand even more deeply. Focusing only on penetration time is one of the most misleading ways to measure a satisfying sex life. Because what the research also shows is that foreplay, touching, kissing, holding, whispering, emotional closeness can last 15 to 20 minutes and contributes to satisfaction and intimacy at least as much, if not more. And this isn't just about emotion. There's real biology here. Physical intimacy, even non-penetrative closeness, triggers the release of oxytocin and dopamine. Oxytocin is your bonding hormone. Dopamine is your reward and motivation chemical. Together, they reduce cortisol, support testosterone levels, strengthen your immune system, and directly benefit your cardiovascular health. In other words, closeness is medicine. Do not measure success in minutes, gentlemen. Measure it in connection. Measure it in warmth. Measure it in how you and your partner feel when it's over. Now, stay with me here, because this next section is one of the most important things I'll share today. And most doctors never take the time to explain this clearly. I want to talk about why regular sexual activity is good for you on a biological level. Let's start with your cardiovascular system. Here's something that may genuinely surprise you. Erectile function is one of the earliest warning signs of cardiovascular disease. The same arterial stiffness, the same plaque buildup, the same endothelial dysfunction that eventually leads to heart attacks. It shows up in the blood vessels of the penis years before it appears in the larger vessels of the heart. Cardiologists now recognize this. The penis, in a very real clinical sense, is an early warning system for your heart. Now flip that around. If regular sexual activity and the physical and emotional arousal that accompanies it keeps those blood vessels flexible and responsive, then staying sexually active isn't just about pleasure. It's about protecting your cardiovascular health. Research confirms this. Men who remain sexually active into their 60s and 70s show measurably better arterial flexibility and endothelial function than men who become completely inactive. Your blood vessels, like muscles, need regular use to stay strong and responsive. Now let's talk about the hormonal loop, because this one surprises most men. We already discussed how testosterone drives desire. But here's what most people don't realize. The relationship runs in both directions. Regular sexual activity, the anticipation, the arousal, the intimacy, signals your brain to maintain testosterone production. Your hypothalamus and pituitary gland are constantly reading your environment and adjusting hormone output accordingly. When your body gets regular signals that intimacy is part of your life, it continues to support the hormonal infrastructure that makes intimacy possible. So when do those signals stop? The system gradually downregulates. And here's where cortisol comes back into the picture. I mentioned earlier that cortisol and testosterone are rivals. Physical intimacy, even holding hands, even a long embrace with your partner, reduces cortisol. That's not a metaphor. That's measurable biochemistry. Lower cortisol means more room for testosterone to do its job. So regular closeness, in any form, is literally protecting your hormonal balance. Now, here is the scientific principle I want you to remember above everything else in this section. In medicine, we call it what it is. Use it or lose it. And when it comes to erectile function, this phrase is not a cliché. It is a physiological fact. The smooth muscle tissue inside your erectile chambers, the tissue that fills with blood to create an erection, requires regular oxygenation and stimulation to stay healthy. With prolonged inactivity, that tissue can develop fibrosis. Essentially, scar-like changes replace healthy, flexible muscles. When that happens, the tissue becomes less able to expand, less able to trap blood, and erection quality declines, not because of desire, not because of testosterone, but because of the tissue itself changing from lack of use. I had a patient, 71 years old, whose wife went through a serious illness. Completely understandably, intimacy stopped entirely for about 14 months. When his wife recovered and they wanted to reconnect, he found that things had changed significantly. Not because of his age, not because of a new medical problem, but because 14 months of complete inactivity had allowed that gradual fibrotic process to take hold. The good news? We worked together on a gradual re-engagement protocol, gentle, patient, no pressure, and over several months, he recovered much of his function. But the lesson he told me he wished he'd known earlier was this: even during difficult seasons of life, maintaining some level of physical intimacy, even without full intercourse, protects the tissue, the nerves, and the vascular pathways that you'll want working again when the season changes. Now, with all of that said, let's talk about balance, because both extremes have consequences. If you're doing too much, your body will tell you. The signs to take seriously are significant exhaustion after sex, shortness of breath that takes longer than normal to recover from, or any chest discomfort. These are signals that the frequency or intensity is exceeding what your cardiovascular system is ready for right now. This is especially important if you're managing heart disease or have had a cardiac event. Sex is physically equivalent to climbing 2 flights of stairs. It's a real cardiovascular demand. Listen to your body. It is always communicating with you. On the other end, if there's growing emotional distance between you and your partner, if morning erections have become rare or have disappeared entirely, or if your desire feels like it's fading in a way that feels different from normal aging, those are signals worth paying attention to. Morning erections, specifically, are a clinical indicator of nighttime vascular health. Their gradual disappearance is something I always want to know about when a patient mentions it. The place you want to be is the balance point. Not excess that strains your heart and your body. And not neglect, not avoidance, that quietly weakens your relationship, your physiology, and your confidence over time. That balance looks different for every man. but it always involves listening to your body and to your partner. All right, let's get practical. Because understanding the science is one thing, knowing exactly what to do is another. So let me give you specific, proven strategies that will make a real difference. Starting with physical health. Walk for 30 minutes every day. I know that sounds almost too simple, but hear me out because this isn't just generic fitness advice. Walking is specifically and powerfully good for erectile health. Here's why. A brisk 30-minute walk increases nitric oxide production, that same molecule we talked about earlier that opens your blood vessels. It strengthens your cardiovascular system, reduces arterial stiffness, and directly improves blood flow to your pelvic region. A 2023 meta-analysis published in the Journal of Sexual Medicine analyzing over 1,000 men across 11 randomized controlled trials found that regular aerobic exercise produced improvements in erectile function comparable to what men see with medication. That is not a small finding, gentlemen. That is extraordinary. And walking is where it starts. Next, and this one my patients are always surprised by, pelvic floor exercises. Most men have never heard of these. But a landmark study in the British Journal of General Practice found that pelvic floor training restored normal erectile function in 40% of men with erectile dysfunction without medication. Here's how to do it. Identify the right muscles by imagining you're stopping urine mid-flow. Contract those muscles for 5 seconds, then fully relax for 5 seconds. That's 1 repetition. Do 10 repetitions per set. 3 sets per day, morning, midday, and evening. Keep your abdominals, buttocks, and thighs completely relaxed while you do this. It takes 4 to 6 weeks to start noticing results and 3 months to see significant improvement. Simple, free, and genuinely effective. Now, nutrition. What's good for your heart is good for your erections because they share the same plumbing. Eat salmon twice a week for your omega-3s, which keep your arteries supple and reduce inflammation. Snack on a 1/4 cup of pumpkin seeds daily. They're one of the richest food sources of zinc, which directly supports testosterone production. And consider adding 200 to 250 milligrams of magnesium glycinate before bed. A 2011 study in biological trace element research found that adequate magnesium intake increased testosterone by 24% over 4 weeks. Magnesium also supports deep sleep, and 90% of your daily testosterone is produced during those deep sleep cycles overnight. On the topic of habits, if you smoke, I'm begging you to seriously consider stopping. Smoking directly damages the endothelium, the inner lining of your blood vessels. It accelerates the exact arterial stiffening we talked about earlier. Every cigarette is actively working against the erection quality you want to preserve. Stay hydrated. Dehydration reduces blood volume, slows circulation, and elevates cortisol. Aim to sip steadily throughout the day, roughly half a glass every 45 to 60 minutes, rather than drinking large amounts all at once. And here's a practical tip my patients really appreciate. If you're planning to be intimate in the evening, keep up that steady hydration through the day, but stop large fluid intake about 45 minutes before. You'll have all the circulatory benefits without the distraction of a full bladder. Mental health matters just as much as physical health. Do not compare yourself to your younger self. That man is gone, and honestly, you don't need to be him. Your body is evolving, and expecting to perform at 65 the way you did at 25 is setting yourself up for frustration that creates the very problem you're afraid of. Talk openly with your partner. I know, that conversation feels vulnerable, but here's what I've seen over and over in my practice. She has already noticed. Pretending everything is fine when it isn't doesn't protect anyone. It just creates distance at the exact moment. Closeness is what you both need. Honesty relieves pressure, and less pressure means better function. Finally, practice relaxation deliberately. Even 5 minutes of slow, intentional breathing before intimacy, 4 counts in, hold for 4, 4 counts out, activates your parasympathetic nervous system, the part of your nervous system responsible for arousal and sexual response. Stress activates the sympathetic system, your fight or flight response. You literally cannot be in fight or flight mode and fully aroused at the same time. 5 minutes of breathing can shift that entirely. Now let me flip the lens for a moment, because knowing what helps is only half the picture. Let's talk about the habits that quietly damage your sexual health, because awareness is the first line of defense. Staying up too late is one of the most underestimated threats. Your body produces the majority of its testosterone during deep sleep, specifically during those first few critical slow-wave sleep cycles. Consistently going to bed past midnight disrupts your entire hormonal rhythm. Aim for 7 to 8 hours. That's not optional. That's maintenance. Excess alcohol damages your liver and your nervous system, both of which play a direct role in healthy erectile function. An occasional glass of wine is fine, but chronic overconsumption, even at moderate levels over years, accumulates real damage. Moderation is not a suggestion. It's a protection. Ignoring your chronic conditions, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, is like ignoring a slow leak. These conditions silently narrow blood vessels, reduce circulation, and erode erectile function over years. Stay on top of your checkups. Take your medications as prescribed. This is non-negotiable. And finally, isolation and emotional withdrawal. Loneliness and depression reduce dopamine and serotonin, the very brain chemicals that fuel desire and pleasure. Staying socially connected, nurturing your relationship, and seeking support when you need it aren't soft suggestions. They're serious medical recommendations. Now let me take a few minutes to answer the questions I hear most often, because chances are at least one of these is something you've wondered about. Does having less sex harm my health? Not inherently, no. But staying sexually active, even at a reduced, age-appropriate frequency, does support immune function, better sleep, heart health, and mood. The absence of intimacy isn't neutral. It has measurable costs over time. Can too much sex be harmful? For a generally healthy man, not really. But if you have chronic illness, particularly cardiovascular disease, the intensity and frequency do matter. Always let your body be your guide. Does sex stop at a certain age? Absolutely not. This is not age-based. It is health-based, desire-based, and relationship-based. I have patients who are sexually active and thriving well into their 80s. I have other patients who slow down earlier. Both are completely normal. The only wrong answer is the one that makes you feel ashamed of wherever you are. What if my desire and my partner's desire don't match? This is more common than you might think, and the answer is conversation. Not pressure, not performance, not pretending. A calm, honest, loving conversation about what you both want and what you're both comfortable with is more powerful than any supplement on the market. Now let's talk about what to expect and when, because this journey is absolutely worth taking, but it requires patience. In the first 1 to 2 weeks of implementing these changes, most men notice better sleep quality and more stable energy throughout the day. Performance anxiety tends to ease slightly as the pressure of keeping score starts to lift. By weeks 3 to 6, you'll likely begin noticing stronger morning erections, more consistent desire, and the pelvic floor exercises will begin delivering real results. Between 2 and 3 months, erection quality improves noticeably, mood lifts, and most men describe feeling more like themselves again. And at the 6-month mark, men who have followed these strategies consistently, not perfectly, but consistently, tell me the same thing. They say, "I feel like myself again." The keyword is consistently. 1 good week changes nothing. 6 consistent months changes everything. Gentlemen, sex after 60 is not a performance review. It is not a competition with your younger self. It is not a test you can pass or fail. It is a conversation between your body and your partner, and the goal of that conversation is connection, warmth, closeness, shared life. Take care of your body. Understand your physiology. Embrace these changes with awareness instead of fighting them with shame. Give your body what it needs, the movement, the nutrition, the sleep, the intimacy, and it will respond. Maybe not the way it did at 30, but in ways that are real and meaningful and yours. So here's my challenge. Commit to 1 change from today's video. Just 1. Start tonight, and then build from there. If this gave you clarity and confidence, please hit that subscribe button, because we go this deep in every single video. And drop a comment below and tell me, what is the one thing you're going to change starting today? I read every single comment. This is Dr. Lila Romano, and I'll see you in the next video.